Hello everyone, hope you all are doing well and staying safe. Welcome to another lesson on bite-sized math made easy. Today we're going to continue learning about fractions, and today's lesson number 3, is about comparing fractions. Okay, so comparing fractions is basically looking at two fractions and determining which is the larger or the smaller fraction. Okay, so there are three methods. I'll just briefly list down the three methods and we'll go through each one of them in detail. Okay, so the first method is when both fractions have the same denominator. Okay, all right, and then the second method is when both fractions have different denominators. Okay, but one fraction has a value less than half and the other fraction has a value more than half. Okay, the third method is similar to method number 2, where both fractions have different denominators, but they lie on the same side of the halfway mark. That means both fractions are either less than half or more than half. Okay, we'll look at the three methods in detail. Okay, let's look at method number 1, where both fractions have the same denominators. Okay, we have looked at this in lesson number 1. We'll just go through that, do a quick review on that. Okay, as you can see here, there are two holes. Okay, the first one at the top is a rectangle, a whole rectangle. They are the same size. The first rectangle have been divided to 5 equal pieces, and 2 pieces have been shaded, and the rectangle below has been divided to 5 equal pieces also, but 4 pieces have been shaded. As you can see, the first fraction, 2 over 5, has a smaller shaded area compared to the other fraction, 4 over 5, which has got a larger shaded area. That means the fraction 4 over 5 is larger than the fraction 2 over 5. Okay, so when two fractions have the same denominator, in this case both have a denominator value of 5, to determine the larger fraction, all you have to do is look at the numerator, right? This one has got a value of 4 and this fraction has got a value of 2, right? Since 4 is larger than 2, then the fraction 4 over 5 is larger than 2 over 5. So 4 over 5 is larger than 2 over 5. Before we go to method number 2, it's good to have a recap of what we learned in lesson number 1, which is all fractions have a value less than 1. Okay, fractions have a value between 0 and 1. So we can divide fractions to 3 groups. Okay, the first group is fractions that are less than half. Okay, they have a value less than half or a value between 0 and half. And the other group has a value more than half, that is more than 1 over 2 but less than 1. And of course the third group will have a value of exactly half. Okay, so all fractions have a value less than 1. We can divide them to 3 groups. The first group, value less than half. The second group, value more than half. And the third group, value equals half. All right. Okay, now let us look at method 2. So let's use an example. Let's compare two fractions. Let's say the first fraction is, let's say it's 2 over 6. And the other one is 5 over 8. Okay, the first thing we have to do is to write an equivalent fraction for half with the same denominator as this fraction, right? So with the denominator of 6, all right? So that would be 3, okay? Because 3 over 6 is an equivalent fraction to half, right? So that we can compare, right? We can see that the numerator 2 is less than the numerator 3. That means this fraction, 2 over 6, is less than this fraction, 3 over 6, as per method 1, which we learned earlier, right? So 2 over 6 is less than 3 over 6 or less than half. So 2 over 6 will belong here on this side, okay? So it has a value between 0 and half, right? So it's a value of less than half. Now let's look at 5 over 8. Again, we have to write an equivalent fraction with a denominator that matches the fraction 5 over 8. Okay, so that will also be 8. So an equivalent fraction of half with a denominator of 8 would be 4. Okay. Now we compare the numerator as per method 1. Since the denominators are the same, 5 is larger than 4. That means the fraction 5 over 8 is larger than the fraction 4 over 8, or more than half. So 5 over 8 would belong here, right? That means it has a value more than half, but less than 1. So we can see that 2 over 6 has a value less than half, and 5 over 8 has a value more than half. That means the fraction 2 over 6 is smaller than the fraction 5 over 8. So now let's move on to method number 3. Here, again, the denominators are not the same, but both are on the same side of the halfway mark, either less than half or more than half. Okay, that means both the fractions are here. Okay, either both the fractions are less than half or both the fractions are more than half. Let's compare these two fractions, 1 over 4 and 3 over 8. As we can see, the denominators are not the same. So to compare, we need to make the denominators the same, right? This has got to do with equivalent fractions, which we learned in lesson number 2 or lesson 002. Okay, so looking at these two fractions, we see this has got 8, and this one, the denominator is 4. Okay, so there is a relationship between 4 and 8. We know 4 multiplied by 2 is 8, right? So what we can do is make this fraction, create an equivalent fraction out of it with a denominator of 8, right? So we're going to do that. We're going to make this 8. And how do we do that? Okay, 4 multiplied by 2 you get 8. And to get an equivalent fraction, we have to multiply the numerator by the same value. That means multiply 2. 1 multiplied by 2 is 2 over 8, right? So now we can compare 2 over 8 and 3 over 8 easily using method number 1 because the denominators are the same. So when the denominators are the same, all we have to do is look at the numerator, 2 and 3, right? So since 3 is larger than 2, then we know that 3 over 8 is larger than 2 over 8, or 3 over 8 is larger than 1 over 4. 8. 3 over 8 is larger than 1 over 4. Okay, let's look at another one of method 3. Okay, this is slightly different. Okay, the denominators are again not the same, but there's no relationship between 3 and 7, right? Okay, in this case, what we have to do is to create equivalent fractions for both, right? In the previous example, we only converted one of the fractions to an equivalent fraction. In this case, we have to convert both fractions to an equivalent fractions with the same denominator. I will multiply 7 and 3. So I get 21 for both, right? Okay, how do I get 21 out of 3? I multiply it with 7. 3 multiplied by 7, I get 21. So I have to multiply 7 to the numerator 2. 2 multiplied by 7, 14, right? So same thing for the fraction at the top. 7 and 21, I have to multiply the denominator by 3 to get 21, and I'll multiply the numerator by 3 also to get 15, right? Now I can compare since both denominators are the same. 21. To determine the larger fraction, I have to look at the numerator. One has got a value of 14. The other one has got the value 15. So 15 over 21 is larger than 14 over 21. That means 5 over 7 is larger than 2 over 3. Okay. All right. Let's look at one more. All right. This is a bit different. Again, the denominators are the same. But this is a bit unique because the numerators are the same, right? Okay, and both of them are less than half. 1 over 8 is less than half. 1 over 4 is less than half, right? And the denominators are not the same. So as I said just now, the unique thing about this fraction is they have the same numerator. Okay, so if you look at this graphically, I've taken a whole, divided it to 8 equal pieces, and for the 1 over 4, the same whole, the same size rectangle, divided to 4 equal pieces. Okay, so I'll quickly highlight 1 over 8. So that's 1 over 8, and this is 1 over 4. As we can see graphically, 1 over 8 is smaller than 1 over 4. But we don't have to draw a diagram to determine that, right? And we don't have to create an equivalent fraction, okay? So the unique thing about this fraction is the numerators are the same, 1 and 1, right? So when the numerators are the same, to determine the smaller fraction, all you have to do is look at the denominator. The larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is when the numerators are the same, right? Because we have divided this rectangle to 8 equal pieces, and we have divided this rectangle to 4 equal pieces. Of course, when you divide a rectangle to more pieces, each slice will be small compared to dividing a rectangle to a lesser number of equal pieces. So the rule is, when you have different denominators but the numerators are the same, to determine the smaller fraction, look at the denominator. The larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is, right? This does not apply only when the numerators are 1, right? Even if we have 3 over 8 and 3 over 4, right, the numerators are the same. All we have to do is look at the denominator, right? So the denominator will tell you whether the fraction is larger or smaller. Okay, before we try some sample problems, these are the answers to worksheet number 002, which was provided in my last video. These are the answers to question number 1. These are the answers for question number 2 and 3. The answers to question number 4. And finally, the answers to question number 5. Okay, let's look at some sample problems. The first one, put the correct symbol, more than, less than, or equal to, in the boxes below. So these questions are all comparing the fractions against half, right? To see which side of the halfway point these fractions are located, whether they are less than half, more than half, or equals to half. Okay, the first thing we have to do is to write an equivalent fraction for half with a denominator that matches this fraction, okay? So it has to be 10, right? So an equivalent fraction for half with a denominator of 10 would be 5. Then using method 1, since now the denominators are the same, we compare the numerator, 5 against 7. 5 is less than 7. That means the fraction 7 over 10 is larger than 5 over 10, or is larger than half. Okay, let's look at this one, 3 over 6 comparing against half, right? So 3 over 6 we know is already an equivalent fraction for half, right? Why is that? Okay, as we studied in lesson number 2, 1 over 2, you multiply the denominator with 3 and the numerator with 3, you would get 2 multiplied 3, 6, 1 multiplied 3, 3, right? So you get 3 over 6, which is an equivalent fraction for half. So the answer to this is 3 over 6 equals half. Okay, let's look at C, right? Okay, it has a denominator which is an odd number, 7, right? Okay, so the halfway mark for 7 would be 3.5, right? So so any numerator that's larger than 3.5, that means that fraction will have a value more than half, right? So for 7, the midway point would be 3.5, and since this numerator has a value of 5, which is larger than 3.5, that means the fraction 5 over 7 would be larger than half. Okay, right, the final one, D. 2 over 8. Again, we create an equivalent fraction for half with a denominator of 8. That would be 4. Okay, now we compare the numerator. Since the denominators are the same, 4 is larger than 2. That means 2 over 8 is a fraction that is less than 4 over 8, or less than half. Alright, so let's look at sample problem number 2. Okay, this is similar. We have to put the symbols more than, less than, or equal to. All right, let's look at A. Okay, this is simple. Using method number 1, the denominators are the same, 5 for each. So we just look at the numerator. This one has got 2 and 4. 2 is less than 4. That means the fraction 2 over 5 is less than the fraction 4 over 5. Okay, let's look at B. Right, this is the opposite of A. The numerators are the same, 3 for each. That means we can determine which fraction is smaller by looking at the denominator. As mentioned earlier, when the numerators are the same, the larger the denominator, the smaller the fraction is. That means 3 over 9 is smaller than 3 over 5. Okay, let's look at C. 3 over 9 and 7 over 8. We're going to use method number 2 because I believe this fraction is less than half and this fraction is more than half. Right? Okay, so 9. The denominator is 9. So the midpoint or the halfway point would be 4.5. Since the numerator is 3, 3 is less than 4.5. So the fraction 3 over 9 must be less than half. Now we look at this fraction, 7 over 8. The denominator is 8. That means the halfway point or the midpoint would be 4. And the numerator, 7, is larger than 4. That means the fraction 7 over 8 must be more than half. So since we have one fraction which is less than half and the other fraction that is more than half, we know that the fraction 3 over 9 must be less than the fraction 7 over 8. Okay, D. 4 over 5 compared against 3 over 4. Okay, we have two fractions which has a value more than half, but the denominators are not the same, right? So what we have to do first is to create equivalent fractions with the same denominator. What would that denominator be? As mentioned earlier, that denominator will be 5 multiplied with 4, 20, right? So 4 over 5, we have to convert it to an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 20. How do you do that? Denominator 5 multiplied with 4, you get 20. That means the numerator, we must also multiply it with 4, we get 16, right? So 4 over 5, the equivalent fraction is 16 over 20, right? That's equivalent fractions explained in lesson number 2. Okay, now 3 over 4, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to convert that to an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 20. So how do we get that? So 4, we have to multiply it with 5, we get 20. That means the numerator, we must also multiply it by 5. So we get 3 multiplied with 5, we get 15, right? So now we can compare. Since the denominators are same, 20 and 20, we compare the numerator. This is 16, this is 15. That means 16 over 20 is larger than 15 over 20, or 4 over 5 is larger than 3 over 4. Okay? All right. That's the sample problems. I've got some worksheets that is based on today's lesson, which is comparing fractions. It would be good if you guys try these problems out, and I will provide my answers in the next video. Okay, so this is worksheet number 3. This is question 1, A to N. This is question number 2 and 3. This is question number 4. Again, a to n. And finally, question 5, which is a word problem. Okay, that's my lesson today on comparing fractions. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, goodbye and take care.